Here we are again, everybody, and I know I left you on a cliffhanger last week talking about how soft skills are really the new survival skills, but how do we measure them? Well, it's part of a really bigger discussion on assessment, and I just so happen to be an assessment geek. It could be my German background, but I truly believe that when we make something tangible, and we can look at observable habits associated with the expression of skills or behaviors. That is a form of measurement, and measuring things helps us understand what matters, visualize growth, motivate us to continue. We do this in our personal lives all the time, although the metrics, your success criteria, you might not know, or you might not make as tangible success criteria as a rubric for your romantic partner, for example. But you have lists there in terms of what makes them an A partner, a B partner, a C partner. Did they do the dishes well at the right time? Do they pick up their clothes? Are they thoughtful? So on and so forth. These are what we call success criteria. And we are constantly measuring experience against expectations. And that is what measurement and performance measurement and assessment really is. Assessments are those moments in time where you carry out a specific thing, a specific measure, whether it's a test or a presentation in an educational context or a professional context, or it's a specific night when the dishes were left dirty in the sink. These are assessments, and they feed into an overall evaluation, which is something that happens with multiple assessments over time. You give an evaluation of someone's performance or growth over time. Maybe you're the kind of partners romantically who sit together every 6 months and take stock of your performance. But we definitely do that in our professional and academic lives. So this question of including skills like empathy, communication, looking at the kind of subject matter through a skills lens, and looking at the kind of research skills or investigative skills or analytical skills or thinking skills associated with exploring the content that you're covering as a subject matter expert, looking at relevant technical aptitudes and turning those into measurable criteria like digital literacy, data management. This is all a way of making more tangible what we are looking for and how we are measuring success. So moving forward, we know we want to change some of those success indicators, but we also, in order to account for some of these success indicators, need to change the way in which we are approaching assessments so that our overall evaluations become more holistic, more meaningful, honestly, more valuable. Because if I think of some of the exams that I took in high school, in university, I crammed for them, I got A's on them, I sat there, I regurgitated the information, I left. I do not remember them. What did they actually measure? Were they really meaningful in terms of certifying me, stamping me as a yes, she has a sociology degree, a developmental psych degree? So this idea of changing the way we assess in order to have holistic evaluations that are taking into consideration, yes, skills with your subject matter expertise, skills with technical aptitude, and skills with these essential human capacities. So 3 things always. We love our good triptychs here. Neurobiologically, anthropologically, we love a good triptych. So I'm pulling out 3 big ideas associated with this week's revolutionary topic: making assessment the learning engine, not the end game, right? So in order to do that, in order to make it the learning engine, we need to do 3 things. We need to focus on authentic assessments. We'll talk about it. We need to focus on process over product, which tends to be formative evaluations, formative assessments, adding to that evaluative picture, right? And lastly, we want to look at reflection and feedback as fueling that learning engine, okay? Authentic assessment. Some people refer to this as assessment for learning as opposed to assessment of learning. We too often are not looking at assessment as the learning engine and thinking of it as this end game, which looks like summative assessments, right? Work, learn. Come at the end, I'm going to give you an exam, multiple choice primarily, and I'm going to gauge what you know. but that's exactly what it's doing. It's gauging what someone might know at a specific point in time. It's not a gauge of learning, and it's definitely not fuel for the learning engine. So authentic assessments are things that embody the next two big ideas, this idea of looking at process-based assignments and including reflection and feedback in those assignments. Authentic assessments, some of the ones we love are project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, these classrooms that are asking us to investigate, research, analyze, synthesize, right? We know a lot of them as educators. We have been told about their significance and importance in deep learning for a very long time. So why don't we do them? Right? What are the pain points associated with actualizing more authentic assessments? Well, some of the big ones. I have a 500 student enrollment in my first year biology course at a university level. I have a 3-hour workshop with these professionals in a professional development context. I have no time and overwhelming curricular expectations to account for in the elementary or secondary school context. I don't have, across all educational contexts, the time, energy, the investment of resources cannot be made, Michelle, in order to more authentically capture someone's learning in something like an inquiry-based, project-based, over time, stretched out experience. You're asking too much. It's true. I'm asking a lot. And we have been asking a lot for the last 20 years when we've been moving towards these revolutionary ideas. Well, we cannot afford to look away any longer, thanks to artificial intelligence and the latest technological disruptions. We cannot use these pain points as excuses to default back to purely summative or mediocre levels of assessment in our educational experiences. We do what we can with what we have, and I understand that we don't have a lot, but there is a way to actually implement authentic assessments at scale, and AI can be a tool in this. Wait for it, we're getting there. So, authentic assessments, this idea of more meaningfully gauging learning as opposed to looking at it as this end product and the snapshot of knowing. Okay, so this means we have to value process over product, right? Like if we're looking at inquiry-based classrooms, it means we need to better gauge learning across various stages of that project, right? Like the research process, the group collaborative writing process, maybe, their ability to empathize with an audience and create empathy maps potentially, their ability to take this, the learner's ability to take this information and generate recommendations or ideas, to put together an argument, whether that be in a presentation format or in a written essay format, right? This is a process, and we want to gauge growth along these different, we want to take snapshots of knowledge and skill asset development at stages of the process, right? This is something that technology can help us with. Moreover, technology must help us with, I would argue. Because even in an elementary classroom where you have potentially a more manageable, sorry, elementary educators, I know it's not manageable, number of students, and you have, this understanding built into the fact that project-based learning is important for a lot of different skill developments at a young age. We have more validity in using these types of authentic methods at various stages of the educational experience. It kind of gets harder at different levels because of different constraints at those levels. Even there, to effectively measure growth of 25 to 30 people, I have a classroom right now of 40 students, and to run formative assessments and to get midpoint gauges of growth in a 8-week course that I'm teaching, I need to leverage technology to help me in that process. So what do I mean? One is I have turned on certain functions and features in the submission process around formative assessments. So let's say it's a written assessment and I want to make sure there's academic integrity. I've asked for students to annotate, provide a 1 to 2 minute vocal or video based, audio or visual based complement to their submission, outlining their process, their thinking. How did they formulate their argument? What were the kind of most valid sources, or where did they get their like aha moments that helped them to generate the submission that I'm about to look at, which is a helpful formative assessment tool. So turning on these functions and features, allowing for audio visual annotations of reflection, looking at quiz-based functions, looking at discussion forums as opportunities to do some narrative analysis and help, and getting AI and narrative analysis tools to help me draw insights and pull insights from that. Those kinds of checkpoints. There's lots of, and if we talk further, you can reach out. There's lots of LMS specific features. So Canva, Brightspace, D2L, Google Classroom, lots of functions and features in these online learning management systems that can assist you in creating more of a running record, a learning log from your students with your students. And then of course, AI is helpful in creating some narrative analysis, creating some insights from some of the annotations and log entries that are submitted in those spaces. You also need to look at reflection and feedback, this third big idea, this third component of the big idea of assessment as being the learning engine and not the end game. We need to leverage self and peer assessments. I think I mentioned this already in another podcast that I love reflective practice for a number of reasons, but one of which is in low resource environments, it allows for a level of formative evaluation, formative input and insight that is not my heavy lift to carry. So I also get learners at formative checkpoints to submit self-evaluations. Their assignments are then also peer evaluated. And these all have 5-10% valuations on them, skills-based rubrics that account for soft skills, subject matter expertise, technical literacy, relevant aptitudes as it applies. So reflection as a tool in the formative evaluation process, helping us in this authentic assessment game. Okay, are you with me? Are you following? And AI as well, and then giving your feedback, right? So these formative evaluations, this idea of reflection and 360-degree feedback, right? So I'm reflecting on my work, building these metacognitive skills, throwing my hat in the ring in terms of where I think I'm at and how my growth in these skill and knowledge assets has been going. Peers are doing that work. And then I'm doing it as an educator, as a guide, as a facilitator. AI can also help me to provide more meaningful feedback at scale. So even with the 40 some odd students that I'm working with here, it is difficult to provide meaningful feedback in a short time frame. I still am spending 10 to 15 minutes per student, unpaid, in terms of providing that feedback, right? So how can I expedite that process, make that process more efficient? Well, obviously, we as educators, when you've marked products, and I know I marked submissions, I know that I've mentioned this as well. There are themes, there are common errors that show up, and we can have AI produce for us feedback associated with those common errors. We can then edit that, nuance that, and copy and paste those as common feedback narratives for our students. Also, I love AI in producing rubric level nudging. So someone who has received a 3, and this is also super helpful with skills that you're not used to marking, right? So let's say you want to include perspective taking, empathy as a skill in your educational experience, because it really matters to the person's job. They're in customer service. They need to be able to empathize, and we don't measure the growth in this skill area in adults ever. Or it's a character education expectation in elementary and high school curriculum. Or we just know that the machines are good at other things and we need to get better and better at these skills. So I'm including perspective taking, as I so should, at all levels of education, in my educational curricula, in my rubric. And I am not used to marking this. I have gotten AI to help me produce the rubric, look at the leveling criteria, and now I want AI to help me nudge a student from a 2 to a 3 or from a 3 to a 4, or those folks that we feel have really done a great job of empathizing and taking the perspective of our desired audience. How do we continue to ask them to push and challenge themselves at a level 4 onwards? Whatever level you find difficult, you can prompt a large language model to give you 4 or 5 different comments you could give a learner at that level to help nudge them to the next. I again then nuance these and make them my own, put them in my own voice, and can use these to directly support the rubric. So a student can not only identify through my comments where they are, but what they can do to action and move forward, right? So you can also input into the AI feedback principles that you want it to embody, like action-oriented, chunking out information, cognitively, making sure it's digestible, using language that you can give it all sorts of precursor data in terms of the kinds of feedback you want it to produce. You can even input it with a model, give me a stop, start, continue piece of feedback for this student, right? Two stars and a wish, whatever feedback structure floats your boat, and you can get the AI to produce in that manner, which you then again can use as a starting point, make it your own, and expedite the communication of that feedback to your learners. So authentic assessment is where we need to be going. Assessing for learning. Things like project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, which we know already to be good practices for deep learning, support authentic assessment structures, which ask us to value process over product. Yes, it asks us to value knowledge and skills in combination, and over time, growth-based metrics, growth-based methods. So that work would benefit and involves the inclusion of reflective practice, so getting self-evals in the mix, peer evals in the mix, and having an emphasis on feedback in the formative stages, diagnostic and formative stages particularly, so that we can fuel that learning in the engine and then culminate in a summative piece of feedback, an exit, an extension narrative that you can offer your students at the end. But that's really the cherry on top of the sundae, right? The cupcake, the meat of it, that's where we want to be focusing our revolutionary efforts, because that's where the hard, challenging moments come in, where we have to struggle with low resources, low energy, not a lot of time, not the right amount of compensation in education, in our industry, absolutely. But we can invest in some capital costs of building out the system and looking at what project-based learning might look like in our context. Look at how we can support self and peer evals and include formative assessments through the LMS and get the technology to help us there. And then look at how we can offer meaningful feedback and designing the rubrics and even just designing what these projects might look like in your context with the help of artificial intelligence. Where artificial intelligence is pushing us towards authentic assessment, because now more than ever, with fears of academic integrity and of what the machines are going to be able to do and the jobs that will be lost, we need to be focusing on the practices of defining and measuring success in our classrooms in line with what is going to keep us versatile and valuable as humans moving forward. And that means rethinking our classrooms in terms of pedagogy and andragogy, focusing on project-based, inquiry-based learning, and rethinking our assessment structures to include formative, process-based models that include reflection and feedback, meaningful, feedback heavy. But don't worry, AI can help you in that process. It's pushing us here, but don't worry, it's here to help us as well. That is the quickest and dirtiest assessment monologue that I've ever delivered. And I want to dive into all of these in more earnest ways with you as potential clients, with you as colleagues. But what we're going to do moving forward in the next few podcasts is focus on these levels of education. You've heard me talk about elementary, secondary, post-secondary and professional learning environments. And I want to look at each one of these environments and how some of these already, these revolutionary ideas that we've already mentioned, right? Focusing on our essential human capacities, relevant technical aptitudes, and shifting towards more skills-based measures, how we can look at each level of education and dive into how we can make that possible. What are the gaps? What are the opportunities? What are the threats? But also, what is the potential in these levels of education so that we can revolutionize the whole learning life cycle from elementary through to our professional learning environment. Stay with me and stay tuned next week. The Education Revolution podcast is produced in-house by community members, and I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Sangera. Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and head over to my website to opt in for my newsletter for more ways to connect with some of these big ideas.